It started with a silence that could be felt across the world. Not the kind that comforts, but the kind that steals the air from your lungs. It was early morning in London when the statement went out, 2 minutes before dawn, 2 minutes before everything changed. The royal family confirms devastating news about His Royal Highness Prince William. That was all the message said at first. But in those few words, the heart of Britain cracked. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. People froze. Phones buzzed. News anchors stuttered mid-sentence. And for a moment, every heartbeat in the United Kingdom seemed to sync with one single question. What happened to Prince William? It wasn't supposed to be this way. William was the picture of health, the image of stability, the man who had carried the legacy of his late mother with strength and humility. The perfect heir, the perfect family man, the future king. Yet now, behind the closed gates of Kensington Palace, something unthinkable had unfolded. Something the palace had kept hidden for weeks. Something that would leave even the most loyal royal supporters speechless. The sky that morning was strangely gray. Reporters had already started camping outside the palace. Their breath misted in the cold, cameras clicking every few seconds as they waited for a glimpse, a sign, anything. Inside, courtiers whispered in the marble hallways, exchanging anxious glances. The air was heavy, the kind of heavy that only comes before the world learns something it can never unlearn. And then, the palace press officer stepped forward. Dressed in a dark suit, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice trembling. "It is with profound sadness," he began, but the next words seemed to dissolve in the air. What was he about to say? Was it an accident? A sudden illness? Or something much darker? Before anyone could process it, social media exploded. The words Prince William trended in over 50 countries. News tickers flashed red. Millions searched for answers. And yet, no one had them. All that existed was confusion and fear. Because if something had happened to Prince William, what did that mean for the future of the monarchy? For Britain? For Kate and their children? Pause for a moment and think about that. A man groomed his entire life to take the throne, suddenly thrust into a storm of secrecy and sorrow. The one royal everyone thought untouchable, now at the center of a nightmare. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. But the truth, the real truth, was far more devastating than anyone dared to imagine. Inside the palace walls, a different kind of panic was unfolding. The king had been woken at 4:37 a.m. by a call that lasted less than a minute. Camilla reportedly dropped her teacup. Prince George's nanny was seen rushing toward the children's wing. Even the palace guards, trained to stay composed no matter what, exchanged looks that betrayed their unease. Something terrible had happened, but no one was ready to say it out loud. Was it an illness? A hidden diagnosis that William had kept from the public? A tragic accident? Or, as some whispered, something far more orchestrated, a decision, a sacrifice, a cover-up? Every possible scenario raced through people's minds. Because this was Prince William, the future of the crown, the embodiment of duty and dignity. How could he, of all people, be the subject of such devastating news? And yet, in hindsight, the signs had been there. The canceled appearances, the tired eyes in his last few photographs, the sudden family retreat to Balmoral that the press called private reflection time. Nobody questioned it then. Now everyone wondered if that was the beginning of the end. A reporter from Sky News later recalled that she'd noticed something odd during William's last event. His hand trembled slightly while shaking hands. Kate kept glancing at him with forced smiles. But the cameras had moved on. The public saw what they always saw: grace, charm, composure. Behind the smiles, however, something had been breaking. And that's what makes this so tragic. Because this wasn't just the fall of a prince. It was the unraveling of a man who'd spent his whole life holding a nation together, while quietly falling apart himself. They say the first clue came not from the palace, but from a medical facility just outside London. A private clinic, discreet, heavily guarded. Staff there were instructed to delete all patient entries for that morning. One nurse, who spoke anonymously, said she'd never seen so many royal vehicles arrive at once. She saw faces she recognized, advisors, bodyguards, even a personal chaplain. And then, silence. The kind that follows when everyone knows something, but no one can say it. By the time dawn broke, the story was already spiraling. Was William still alive? Was this a medical emergency or a long battle the public was never told about? Why did Buckingham's spokesperson seem to hold back tears while speaking? The contradictions only deepen the mystery. And here's where it gets darker. Because according to insiders, this wasn't just a sudden turn of fate. There were warnings, ignored ones. Medical evaluations going back months. Late-night meetings between the king and senior physicians. Even confidential discussions about succession weeks before the official statement. So, if the palace already knew, why keep it secret? What were they protecting? Or who? It's said that even Kate herself begged for more time. Not for doctors to heal him, but for the family to process it before the world did. She wanted her children shielded from the chaos. She wanted William to spend his final days away from flashbulbs, away from headlines, away from the crown he'd carried like armor all his life. But time, cruel as ever, refused to wait. This is not just a royal crisis. It's a human tragedy. Strip away the titles, the palaces, the pageantry, and what you find is a man, a husband, a father, fighting something he never saw coming. The future king, staring at a ticking clock no one can stop. And a family, trapped between duty and heartbreak. For those who grew up watching William and Harry walk behind Diana's coffin, this hits differently. The boy who once comforted a nation is now the one being mourned. The irony is painful, almost poetic. It's as if history decided to echo itself. Only this time, there would be no happy ending. But the palace wasn't ready to tell everything. Not yet. The statement was deliberately vague, crafted in layers of politeness that concealed the magnitude beneath. A personal matter. A period of rest. The family requests privacy. Innocent words, yet devastatingly final. Behind them, the reality was brutal. Prince William had been given only weeks to live. Imagine hearing those words about someone who seemed invincible. A man who jogged through Kensington Gardens, smiled through endless ceremonies, waved to children, and laughed with his family. A man who, just months ago, stood before thousands at a charity gala and promised to build a future worthy of our children. Now, that future was slipping away. And still, the palace held back. No diagnosis. No name of the illness. No explanation. Just silence. But silence breeds suspicion. And within hours, rumors filled the void. Some whispered it was cancer. Others spoke of a rare genetic disorder. A few even suggested poisoning. But none could confirm. And the royal communications team, always poised, chose their favorite weapon, deflection. The Prince of Wales is focusing on his health and appreciates the nation's support. A perfectly worded nothing. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Harry was reportedly blindsided. He found out through a third party, not through family. The call came later. A conversation that would shake him and rekindle a bond buried under years of resentment. But that's a story for later. For now, the world's eyes stayed fixed on one question. How long does Prince William have left? This story isn't about pity. It's about power, legacy, and the cruel twist of fate that turns kings into mortals. It's about how the royal family, known for secrecy, may have waited too long to face the truth. And perhaps, it's about what happens when the heart of a nation starts to break before the crown can mend it. By midday, crowds had gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Flowers piled along the black iron gates. Children left handwritten notes. Strangers hugged. Someone played God Save the King on a violin that trembled with emotion. And still, no one knew the full truth. The palace curtains remained closed. Kate had not been seen. And the children, George, Charlotte, Louis, were quietly taken away to an undisclosed location. The monarchy, 1,000 years old, was standing on fragile ground. Because when the heir to the throne faces his final days, it isn't just a family that mourns, it's a country. And Britain, for the first time since Diana's passing, was collectively holding its breath. Every generation has a moment it never forgets. For some, it was Diana. For others, the Queen. For this one, it would be William, the prince who was supposed to become king, but instead became a symbol of how even the most powerful hearts can falter. The palace clock struck 12. Reporters waited for an update, but the only sound was the wind brushing through the flags. The family was inside, meeting with royal physicians. The king was pale, Camilla silent. Kate was in the corridor outside the study, clutching a letter William had written, one that might never see the light of day. The letter's contents were said to contain his final wish, his last message to the world. But no one, not even the king, had read it yet. And that's where this story begins. With a sealed envelope, a family in shock, and a country on the edge of despair. Because as the palace spokesman turned once more to the cameras, clearing his throat, the world leaned in. His lips parted, his voice shaking as he whispered the words that would make history. His Royal Highness. As only a few weeks left, the cameras flashed, reporters gasped, and somewhere, across the world, a clock began to tick. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever felt the world stop? Not just slow down, but truly stop, for a single sentence? That's what happened the moment the palace confirmed it. His Royal Highness has only a few weeks left. The line echoed through every newsroom, across every television, into every living room. It was like a thunderclap that no one could hide from. For years, people had seen Prince William as unbreakable, a man molded by tragedy, yet stronger for it. He'd endured loss, scrutiny, and endless comparisons, but always stood tall. And now, those words stripped all that strength away. Just a man. Just mortal. Just time running out. The first minute after the announcement felt unreal. News anchors froze on camera, their earpieces crackling as producers shouted for confirmation. People thought it was a hoax, a cruel internet prank. After all, this was the man jogging alongside his kids in Windsor Gardens just weeks earlier. He was laughing, waving, smiling. How could that same man be dying? And yet, inside the palace gates, silence reigned. Courtiers moved briskly but avoided eye contact. Aides carried folders stamped with red seals. The family's private physician entered the king's study carrying a small leather-bound report. And somewhere upstairs, Kate was sitting alone, staring at a photo of their wedding day. The official statement had been deliberately short, 32 words to announce the unimaginable. There was no mention of illness, no mention of treatment, only the phrase, irreversible condition. Those 2 words were enough to send the press into a frenzy. What did it mean? Was it physical, psychological, genetic? No one knew, and the palace wasn't talking. But sources close to the family say the decision to go public wasn't voluntary. The leak was coming. A senior aide had apparently tipped off a journalist the night before, forcing the palace to act fast to control the story. And so, at 6 a.m., before breakfast even hit the royal table, the announcement went live. Let's rewind a little. The night before the world knew, the palace was in chaos. William had collapsed during a private dinner with Kate and the king. The moment was brief, seconds, maybe, but enough to trigger alarms. He was rushed to a secure facility under the pretense of routine tests. But when doctors returned with the scans, their expressions said everything. Something was eating away at him, something no medication could stop. They say King Charles stood motionless, gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles went white. Camilla whispered something that no one heard. Kate sobbed quietly, refusing to leave the room. William, conscious but weak, simply asked, "How long?" The doctor hesitated, then lowered his eyes. And yet, the palace chose silence. For nearly 48 hours, they debated what to do. Announce it now and risk panic? Or delay, and risk a leak that would make them look deceitful? Eventually, one decision was made. Honesty, at least a version of it. By dawn, the Royal Communications Office had drafted the statement. The king approved it without a word. And 2 hours later, that voice, steady but trembling, faced the world and ended the illusion of royal invincibility. Out on the streets, it was as if time folded. Office workers gathered around screens. Taxi drivers turned up their radios. Parents paused school runs to scroll through headlines. In pubs, in classrooms, even on trains, one name echoed over and over. William. Cameras caught scenes outside Buckingham Palace. An elderly woman clutching a Union Jack, tears streaming down her face. A little boy placing a drawing of a crown with angel wings near the gate. A man removing his hat, whispering, "Not him. Please, not him." But inside the palace, the weight of centuries pressed down. A royal historian later said it best. When a future monarch's mortality is laid bare, it shakes the illusion of permanence the crown depends on. The British monarchy wasn't just losing a prince. It was confronting the truth that even kings bleed. Kate's private secretary revealed that after the statement went public, Kate shut herself in the nursery for nearly 2 hours. No phone, no press, just her and the children's drawings pinned to the wall. When she finally emerged, her eyes were red but her voice steady. "We have to carry on," she said. It sounded like something William himself would say. Meanwhile, the king's first instinct wasn't sorrow, it was control. He called an emergency meeting of the Privy Council. Advisors gathered in the white drawing room, their whispers low, their faces grave. Charles listened to reports about public reaction, succession procedures, and media containment. But at one point, he simply stood up and left the room, saying, "A father shouldn't have to bury his son." That line was never meant for the cameras, but someone close to him repeated it later that day, and it spread like wildfire. Then there was Harry. Word reached him in California before dawn. He reportedly woke up to 50 missed calls from unknown numbers and one voicemail from his father's aide. "Urgent family matter. Call back immediately." He did, and when the truth hit him, he reportedly said nothing for nearly a full minute. Meghan, still half asleep, asked what was wrong. Harry's response was simple: "It's William." And just like that, the brotherly silence that had lasted over a year shattered. Within hours, Harry's private jet was on standby. The palace, however, wasn't sure they wanted him there yet. Not because of anger, but because of optics. The press would turn it into a circus. Yet, deep down, William had already made his wish clear weeks earlier. "If it ever comes to this, I want my brother by my side." In the hours that followed, London felt suspended between past and present. Reporters compared it to the morning after Princess Diana's death, an eerie stillness that carried both grief and disbelief. Only this time, there was no accident to blame. No paparazzi chase. Just a clock quietly ticking toward an inevitable goodbye. The BBC began rolling special coverage titled "The Prince and the People." Old footage resurfaced. William laughing with schoolchildren, embracing veterans, planting trees, comforting flood victims. Every image now felt heavier, like a preview of what the world was about to lose. But even as tributes poured in, not everyone bought the palace's version. Online, theories began to swirl. Some claimed William had been poisoned during an overseas trip. Others pointed to his recent exhaustion, suggesting overwork or burnout. A few insisted it was all an elaborate cover for something political, perhaps even tied to the king's health. Each theory more desperate than the last. Still, there was one pattern no one could ignore: the palace's contradictions. Officials said William was resting comfortably, yet he hadn't been seen. They claimed he'd be resuming duties soon, yet his calendar was wiped clean. Someone was lying or hiding something. At 9 a.m., the palace gates opened briefly. A black Range Rover pulled out, windows tinted. Inside, Kate sat beside William, who wore a cap low over his face. Cameras captured only a glimpse of his hand resting weakly on hers. The nation exhaled. He was alive, but he looked changed, pale, thinner, almost fragile. That brief sighting fueled more speculation than it calmed. Some claimed he was on his way to a hospital outside London for experimental treatment. Others said he was being moved to a private royal residence for end-of-life care. The palace, again, said nothing, and the silence screamed louder than any statement. By afternoon, candlelight vigils began across the UK. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace, singing hymns. Someone projected Diana's image onto the palace walls, a mother's face watching over her son. It was haunting and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. And yet, even in that grief, people couldn't shake the question: how could the palace let this happen? How could they not have told the public sooner? A retired royal advisor, speaking off record, said it wasn't neglect. They thought they had more time, he explained. But the disease advanced faster than anyone imagined. Disease. That word, slipped accidentally into conversation, sent ripples through the media. The palace scrambled to downplay it, but the damage was done. The world now knew it wasn't an accident or exhaustion. It was illness, something fatal. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the American press took a more emotional approach. Headlines like "Britain's Heartbreak" and "The Prince Who Won't Be King" flooded networks. Late-night hosts offered tributes. Even political leaders issued statements of solidarity. The story had gone beyond the monarchy. It had become human. Inside the palace, time blurred. Days and nights became one long stretch of whispers and waiting. The king visited William's bedside daily. Kate rarely left his side. Doctors spoke in low tones. And yet, somehow, through it all, William still smiled. He insisted on video calling his children each night, reading bedtime stories even when his voice cracked. Those close to him say he refused to let despair win. "I'm not done yet," he told one nurse. "I have promises to keep." But as word spread that his condition was worsening, the palace began preparing for what it called the inevitable transition. A code phrase: cold, bureaucratic, heartless, but necessary in royal protocol. Behind the curtain, contingency plans unfolded, security adjustments, media blackout drills, succession paperwork. The monarchy was preparing for a loss before the public could even say goodbye. And just when the world began to settle into grief, something strange happened. A royal insider leaked that William had recorded a private message, a video, to be released posthumously. No one knew what was in it, only that he'd done it weeks before the diagnosis became public. The timing raised a terrifying question. Did William know all along? The thought sent chills across the country. Had he been keeping it from everyone, even Kate, until it was too late? Or had the palace silenced him to avoid panic? The day after the announcement, the king called for total media restraint. But that didn't stop whispers from within the palace itself. Someone had overheard William tell a priest, "I just don't want my children to see me fade." That line, soft, private, heartbreaking, spread online within hours. Suddenly, it wasn't just a story of illness. It was a story of love, of fear, of a man trying to protect his family from watching him disappear. And as dusk settled over London, a single bell rang from St. James's Palace. Slow, measured, final. Crowds outside looked up, confused. No one knew if it was ceremonial or accidental. But every toll of that bell carried a chill. Each ring felt like a countdown. The world was waiting for the next update. But when it came, it wouldn't be what anyone expected. Because even as the palace asked for calm, something new was about to break. Something hidden deep within Buckingham's walls that would shake the story to its core. And no one, not even the king, was ready for it. What the palace tried to bury was about to rise to the surface. And once it did, there would be no going back. What happens when the walls of a 1,000-year-old palace start to whisper? When secrets once buried under gold ceilings begin to leak through cracks of silence? In the hours following that devastating announcement, the world watched the palace gates remain shut. Cameras flashed against the iron bars, but inside, the tension was heavier than the November fog. Everyone seemed to know something, yet no one dared to say it out loud. A maid later confessed that you could feel it in the air, a strange, electric grief that pulsed through every corridor. Footsteps echoed softer, voices dropped to whispers, and even the portraits of past monarchs seemed to stare differently. Buckingham Palace, the fortress of protocol and poise, had become a house of dread. At the center of it all was a file. A single, slim folder stamped, "Confidential, Royal Medical Affairs." That file sat locked inside the king's private desk, a place reserved for matters too sensitive for even his closest advisors. Only 3 people had seen it: the king, the royal physician, and the man himself, Prince William. And yet somehow, within 12 hours of the announcement, fragments of that file were being discussed in corridors. By dawn, words like rare, degenerative, and terminal floated from one mouth to another. The palace press team scrambled to contain it, but rumors move faster than truth, especially when truth hides behind velvet curtains. What was in that file? What could possibly bring the most composed man in Britain to tears? Some said it revealed an illness so rare it had baffled specialists across Europe. Others believed it wasn't an illness at all, but the result of years of suppressed stress, royal obligation, and sleepless nights. The staff who had served William for years began connecting dots. His sudden weight loss, his retreat from public events, the trembling hand captured in one stray photograph. One footman told a friend that William had been quietly fading for months, masking pain with charm. He'd insist on standing for long engagements, even when his legs seemed to shake beneath him. Inside the palace kitchens, gossip brewed stronger than the morning tea. A chef whispered that he'd been instructed to prepare special low-sodium meals, an odd change for someone as athletic as William. Another claimed she saw Kate herself picking up herbal prescriptions from the royal apothecary. Each detail added to the unease. But the most haunting rumor came from a palace aide who said she overheard a conversation between the king and his son 2 weeks before the announcement. It happened in the library, quiet, empty except for the ticking of a clock. The king's voice, low and heavy, asked, "Have you told Catherine?" William's reply, "Not yet. She still believes there's time." Those words spread like wildfire. Was Kate being protected or kept in the dark? Did she know how serious it was before the rest of the world did? The staff loyalty began to fracture. Some believed the truth should be told in full. After all, the public had a right to know. Others said this was a family matter, sacred and private. In between those two camps, chaos brewed. Meanwhile, the press outside was desperate. Every movement inside the palace turned into breaking news. When a single light turned on in the East Wing, headlines screamed, "Emergency meeting in progress." When a helicopter passed overhead, it became, "William airlifted to secret facility." It didn't matter if it was true. What mattered was that people were hungry for answers. And yet, amid all the noise, one voice cut through, the palace chaplain. He told a small gathering of staff that His Royal Highness has made peace with his fate. It sounded comforting, but those who knew the palace well understood the darker meaning. Peace often came only when hope was gone. Inside the king's study, another kind of discussion was unfolding. Advisors were urging Charles to consider the line of succession. Should plans for George's future be accelerated? Should regency options be prepared? The king slammed his palm on the table and said, "He's not gone yet." For a moment, no one spoke. Then one advisor murmured, "But he will be." That sentence lingered in the room like smoke. Late that night, a young communications assistant noticed something odd. A fax arrived from St. Mary's Hospital, London, marked urgent. She wasn't supposed to see it, but curiosity won. It contained test results addressed to Windsor Internal Medicine. The word she caught before her supervisor snatched it away. Rapid progression confirmed. No further intervention recommended. That line haunted her. No further intervention recommended. What could that possibly mean for a prince? Was it too late? And so, whispers turned to panic. Staff began quietly transferring duties, shredding papers, preparing for what no one wanted to admit. The press office drafted multiple statements, one for improvement, one for decline, one for the worst. They didn't know which they'd need first. Meanwhile, in a smaller, dimly lit room at the far end of the palace, Kate sat with her sister Pippa, holding a cup of untouched tea. "They're not telling me everything," she whispered. "I can feel it." She wasn't wrong. Behind closed doors, the royal physician had already briefed the king. William's condition was deteriorating faster than projected. There would be good days, brief flashes of normalcy, but the decline was irreversible. The king's face reportedly drained of color. He ordered every detail kept from the public until further notice. "No panic," he said. "Not yet. But Buckingham is not a fortress of secrets anymore. There are too many cameras, too many cell phones, too many people desperate for truth or fame." Within 24 hours, a journalist from The Guardian received an anonymous tip. Prince William's condition worse than reported. Source inside palace says internal panic. By morning, the headline hit the web. Crisis in the crown. Inside the panic over Prince William's health. The palace denied it, of course. They always do. But denials only feed curiosity. Reporters began contacting every doctor in London, every royal aide they'd ever met. Some refused to comment. Others, perhaps out of guilt or pity, hinted at something that made the public shiver. William had known about his condition long before the announcement. If that was true, then the entire narrative, the sudden shock, the breaking news, was a facade. The illness hadn't arrived overnight. It had been growing quietly, a shadow in the corner of every photograph, every speech, every forced smile. Inside the palace archives, staff began locking away anything that could be considered sensitive. William's personal journals, his correspondence with charities, his handwritten notes about mental health initiatives, all sealed in boxes marked private property of the crown. Why? To protect him, or to protect the institution. Even his closest friends were silenced. Sir David Attenborough, who had worked closely with William on conservation efforts, was asked to decline interview requests. His assistant later admitted he'd been heartbroken. He adored William, said he was one of the few who truly cared about the planet. But when he tried to visit, The palace told him it wasn't appropriate. It was as if they were erasing him before he was gone. And then, just as the rumors seemed ready to consume everything, a new voice entered the mix, a junior staffer from the royal communications team. He'd been with the family for less than a year, idealistic and naive. He couldn't take the secrecy anymore. Late one night, he reached out to a friend at a small independent paper and said 4 words that sent chills down every spine. The doctors found something. When pressed for more, he hesitated, then added, "It's not just illness. It's discovery." What kind of discovery? A misdiagnosis? A genetic secret? The journalist tried to follow up, but the line went dead. The staffer resigned the next morning, vanishing without trace. His official reason: personal health. By now, the whispers inside Buckingham had become a storm. The king called for silence. Kate demanded answers. And the world, watching from outside, sensed that the truth was far more complex than anyone dared imagine. That night, under a rain-soaked sky, a palace guard claimed to have seen 2 black sedans arrive at a side entrance near midnight. They carried men in suits. Medical? Legal? No one knew. They entered with briefcases, stayed less than an hour, and left without a word. The next morning, security footage from that wing was erased due to technical error. Technical error. In a palace that logs every second. Something bigger was happening behind those gilded walls, something even the royal announcement hadn't revealed. And the few who knew the full truth were bound by silence or fear. But silence doesn't last forever. Because just days later, that same folder marked "Confidential, Royal Medical Affairs" would vanish from the king's desk. Gone. No record of removal. No sign of theft. Just gone. And when it reappeared, it wouldn't be in the palace at all. It would be on a journalist's desk, inside a plain brown envelope, with one note attached: "The truth belongs to the people." What that envelope contained would shake the monarchy to its foundation, and it would mark the beginning of the end. Sometimes the most heartbreaking part of a tragedy isn't the announcement itself, but the silence that follows it. And inside Kensington Palace, that silence was deafening. After the official statement, the world looked to one person for strength: Catherine, Princess of Wales. The nation wanted her calm, her poise, her assurance that everything would be all right. But behind those palace doors, the woman known for her grace was unraveling in private. The cameras caught glimpses of her outside, always perfectly dressed, composed, waving softly to the press. But the truth was far from those fleeting smiles. Behind closed doors, Kate was breaking. Quietly, privately, completely. They say that in those days, she often sat by William's bedside long after the doctors had left. She'd take his hand, trace her thumb across his knuckles, and whisper words only he could hear. "You promised me forever," she said once, her voice barely above a whisper. "You said we'd grow old together." William smiled weakly. "I still plan to," he murmured. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. She tried to hold it together for the children. Every morning, she woke them up as usual, read them stories, packed their lunches. But George was old enough to sense something was wrong. "Why is Daddy tired all the time?" he asked one morning. Kate's throat tightened. "Because Daddy's been working too hard, love. He needs some rest." But the lie tasted bitter. Every day felt like pretending. Pretending the world wasn't collapsing. Pretending the headlines didn't hurt. Pretending she didn't hear the whispers from staff. Words like palliative, final stages, no improvement. Kate had always been strong. The rock of the family. The steady one. But nothing prepares you for watching the love of your life fade day by day, even as the world watches and dissects your every expression. When the news first broke, she begged the palace to delay any public appearances. "Just a few days," she pleaded. "Let the children adjust." But the crown doesn't wait for grief. The machine must keep moving. So, she appeared, as always, shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes bright. The cameras called it bravery. She called it survival. What the cameras didn't see was what happened later that night. After putting the children to bed, she went into the study and locked the door. Staff said they heard quiet sobbing that lasted for hours. The next morning, her eyes were swollen, but her smile was perfect again. That's the thing about Kate. She learned long ago that the world expects a performance. But performances come at a cost. One evening, about a week after the announcement, she received a call from a close friend, one of the few people outside the palace she still trusted. The friend asked gently. How are you holding up? Kate's answer was chillingly simple. I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore. That night, she opened her laptop and began writing something. A letter, a message, maybe just thoughts she couldn't say out loud. The page started blank, then slowly filled with words that spoke of love, fear, and something darker, resentment. They knew, she typed. They knew before I did. She never finished that letter. She deleted it before sunrise. But the sentiment lingered. You see, by then, Kate had begun to realize what the rest of the world would soon learn. This wasn't just a tragedy of fate. It was a tragedy of silence. The palace had known about William's condition for months, maybe longer. And yet, they'd kept her in the dark. One of her aides later confirmed that Kate found out about the terminal nature of William's diagnosis only days before the public announcement. She thought it was manageable, the aide said. She believed he'd recover. When she learned the truth, she collapsed into a chair and whispered, "He didn't even tell me." But was that fair to William? Maybe he was protecting her. Maybe he wanted her to believe everything was fine until he couldn't pretend anymore. Love can make people hide the worst parts of truth. Still, the betrayal stung. Because Kate wasn't just a wife. She was a partner, a mother, a future queen. And now she was being treated like a spectator in her own life. In the following days, she threw herself into routine. She attended charity meetings, visited children's hospitals, even smiled for cameras. But those who knew her could see the cracks forming. Her words became shorter, her laughter rarer. One photographer noticed that in her last public appearance with William, she never let go of his hand, not once. And yet, even as she fell apart privately, she became the family's emotional anchor. The king, exhausted and heartbroken, began leaning on her for strength. Catherine understands what must be done, he reportedly told advisors. She's the only one who does. But understanding doesn't mean accepting. Late one night, she called her mother, Carol Middleton. Their conversation was brief but raw. "Mum, I can't lose him," she said, voice trembling. "Not like this. Not so soon." Her mother's answer was simple. "Then fight, darling. Fight for the truth." That phrase stuck with her. The next morning, Kate requested access to all of William's medical records. The palace doctor refused, citing protocol. That word, protocol, broke her composure. "He's my husband," she snapped. Not a protocol. But she never got the files. They were sealed by royal decree. Only the king had full access. That's when she began to suspect something more. Why the secrecy? Why the restrictions? Why had so many doctors come and gone, each sworn to silence? Something didn't add up. A few days later, she made a late-night phone call. It wasn't a family. It wasn't to the palace. It was to someone in the press. The call lasted just 4 minutes. But those 4 minutes would later become one of the biggest scandals in modern royal history. She didn't reveal everything, but she said enough to light a spark. "I can't tell you what's wrong," she said, her voice shaking. "But it's not what they're saying. Please look closer." The next morning, an investigative journalist known for her royal coverage received an anonymous envelope on her doorstep. Inside was a note written in delicate handwriting. "The truth is hidden in the reports. Start with the tests from Scotland." No name, no signature. That journalist would go on to uncover details that would send shockwaves through the palace, but that revelation was still weeks away. For now, Kate's world was collapsing inward. She began spending more time alone, retreating into the royal gardens. Staff often found her wandering near the old oak tree where she and William used to have picnics before they married. Once, she sat there for nearly an hour, staring into the distance, tears running silently down her cheeks. When asked if she wanted company, she said softly, "He used to laugh here. I can still hear it." That same night, she went to William's study. On his desk was a small, leather-bound notebook. Inside were scribbles, half-finished letters to their children, reflections about duty and legacy, and one line written in his neat, careful hand. "If I leave before my time, promise me they'll know I tried." She closed the book and held it against her chest. That's when the tears came, deep, uncontrollable sobs that shook her to her core. But she didn't cry because he was dying. She cried because she finally understood he'd known all along. And in that moment, love turned into fury. The next day, she confronted the king. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She demanded. "You made me smile for cameras while he was slipping away." The king, visibly shaken, said, "He asked us not to. He wanted to protect you." Her voice broke. "Protect me? From the truth." They stood there, 2 generations of royal composure cracking under the weight of grief. "You don't protect someone by lying to them," she said finally, before walking out. But even as her anger burned, the love never faded. That night, she returned to William's bedside, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I'm here. Always." It was then that he looked at her with a weak smile and said something she'd never forget. "When I'm gone, tell them I was happy." Kate couldn't answer. She just nodded through her tears. Outside the palace walls, the world was speculating. Inside, a woman was silently preparing for the unthinkable. But fate wasn't done with her yet. Because the next morning, as she walked into the corridor outside William's room, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A quiet voice on the other end whispered, "You don't know me, ma'am. But I've seen the reports. What they told you isn't the truth." Her heart stopped. "Who is this?" she asked. But the line went dead. She stared at the phone, frozen. The number was untraceable. The voice unfamiliar. And just like that, the story she thought she understood took a darker turn. Because if that voice was right, the royal family's tragedy wasn't just about illness. It was about deception. And soon, the world would know it. It's one thing to hear that someone you love is sick. It's another to discover that the truth has been wrapped in royal ribbons and hidden behind medical jargon no one dares to question. That was the reality unfolding inside Buckingham and Kensington both. A quiet war between doctors, the crown, and the fragile thread of hope that Catherine clung to like air. The story of Prince William's diagnosis didn't begin the night of his collapse, as the press believed. It began months earlier, long before anyone connected the dots. There had been signs, faint at first, a sudden exhaustion after charity events, occasional dizziness that he brushed off as dehydration. Small things, easy to ignore, especially for a man raised to appear unbreakable. But behind the scenes, the palace doctors were worried. His blood work showed anomalies, subtle but persistent. He was advised to rest, but William refused. "People are counting on me," he'd said. "I can't vanish without reason. That's the thing about duty. It doesn't care about health. It doesn't pause for pain." And for months, he wore his illness like a hidden crown, unseen but heavy. The turning point came during a private event in Scotland. William was there with Kate and a few aides, visiting a veterans rehabilitation center near Balmoral. Halfway through a conversation, he lost his balance. His vision blurred. The room spun. He smiled, excused himself, and stepped outside. An aide followed him, finding him leaning against a wall, eyes closed. "I just need a minute," he muttered. But when he opened his eyes, there was fear in them. That night, he was flown to London for routine tests. The official story to the public was exhaustion. Behind closed doors, scans revealed something far worse. The doctor in charge, Dr. Alastair Reeves, was one of the best in his field, known for discretion, respected for honesty. When he entered the king's private office with the report, the room froze. He placed the folder on the desk and said quietly, "Your Majesty, I wish I had better news." The king didn't speak. He just nodded for him to continue. "The condition is rare," Reeves said. "Progressive. We can manage the symptoms for a time, but there's no cure." "How long?" the king asked. Reeves hesitated. "If progression continues at this rate, perhaps months. A year at best." Camilla gasped softly. The king closed his eyes. And just like that, the future of the monarchy changed forever. But rather than accept the truth, they did what royals have done for generations. They controlled the narrative. The diagnosis was classified royal confidential. Only a handful of people knew, and even fewer understood what it meant. William himself refused to accept it. "You're wrong," he told Reeves. "You must be." "I'm fine." Denial. It's a strange comfort. It makes you feel in control even when your body isn't. For weeks, William convinced himself the doctors had misread the scans. He continued working, attending events, meeting officials. Every smile was defiance. Every handshake was denial. Kate noticed, of course, the tremors, the fatigue, the dark circles hidden behind practiced charm. She begged him to rest, to get a second opinion. He promised he would, but promises mean little when made to ease a loved one's worry. He never went. By the time the palace forced another evaluation, it was too late. The disease, whatever it was, had advanced. Reeves's face told the story before his words did. "It's spreading faster than we expected," he said gently. "We're running out of options." William looked him in the eye and said, "There's always an option. You just haven't found it yet." Doctors tried experimental treatments, quietly, away from the press. A team from Switzerland was flown in under false names. Specialists from Germany and Canada arrived through side entrances. The medical wing of the palace was transformed into a private clinic. But no matter what they tried, nothing worked. And then came the part no one was ready for: the confrontation between medicine and monarchy. Reeves wanted transparency. He believed the public had a right to know that hiding William's condition would only make the fallout worse later. But the king disagreed. "We protect our own," he said. "The crown cannot be seen as fragile." It wasn't just pride. It was preservation. The monarchy, already shaken by scandal and division, couldn't risk another blow, especially one that struck the heart of its future. So, they silenced the truth. Reeves was placed under an extended non-disclosure order, legally binding and airtight. Even his medical staff were made to sign oaths of secrecy. But one of them, a young lab technician, broke down after the announcement. She confided to a friend that she couldn't bear the guilt. "They're not telling people everything," she whispered. "It's not just sickness. It's what caused it." That word, caused, would haunt the palace later. Meanwhile, William continued pretending. He appeared on video calls, smiling faintly, his complexion pale under studio lighting. The press called him heroic. But behind that smile was a man who could barely stand without assistance. Kate knew the truth now, though she wished she didn't. She'd confronted Reeves privately, demanding answers the palace wouldn't give. "Tell me," she said. "I'm his wife. I deserve to know." Reeves hesitated, then said quietly, "It's an aggressive form of neurological degeneration. It affects his motor control, his memory, his energy. He'll have good days and bad days, but it's terminal," she finished for him. He didn't correct her. For days, she said nothing. She just sat with William, holding his hand, pretending to believe his reassurances. "I'll be fine, Kate," he'd say. "It's just fatigue." She'd nod and smile, but every time he turned away, her eyes filled with tears. The hardest part wasn't losing him. It was watching him pretend he wasn't already slipping away. There were moments, though, when the mask fell. Late at night, when the pain grew worse, when the tremors wouldn't stop, when he'd whisper, "I'm sorry, love. I tried." She'd hold him tighter, whispering back, "Don't you dare say goodbye yet." The king, too, struggled between hope and dread. He ordered constant medical updates, demanded consultations from international experts. But every report came back the same: irreversible. Still, denial ran deep. Even as the doctors warned of limited time, Charles insisted on drafting new public appearances for William. "If the people see him strong, they'll believe it," he told his staff. But one aide finally said what everyone was thinking. "Your Majesty, belief won't keep him alive." Silence. Then the king dismissed them all. The strain inside the palace was suffocating. Staff walked on eggshells. Every knock on the door felt like bad news. Every ring of the phone brought fear. And then came the worst call of all. It was a cold evening in November when Reeves phoned the king directly. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "we've reached the stage we discussed." The king's hand trembled as he lowered the receiver. He walked slowly to William's room, where Kate sat reading beside him. "How bad?" she asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look on his face said everything. From that night on, the palace was no longer in denial. It was in preparation. Reeves assembled a palliative care team under the guise of wellness specialists. They were discreet, professional, invisible to the press. But their presence meant only one thing: the fight was nearly over. Still, William refused to surrender. "I need to see Harry," he told his father one morning. "It's time." Charles hesitated. "Are you sure?" William nodded. "Before it's too late." And so, messages were sent. Flights arranged. The brothers' reunion was being set in motion. But before that meeting could happen, the truth, the full, devastating truth, was about to leak in the most unexpected way. Because someone in the medical team had made a copy of that confidential file before it was sealed. And that copy was no longer inside the palace. It was already on its way to a newsroom in London. The next headline wouldn't just reveal William's illness. It would expose how deep the palace's deception truly went. And when it hit, no one, neither the king, nor Kate, nor the public, would ever see the monarchy the same way again. There's something unsettling about watching a monarch pace. When the person who is supposed to embody calm, tradition, and control starts showing cracks, you know the storm has already broken. Inside Buckingham Palace, the walls that once held secrets were now vibrating with panic. The leaked medical file had reached the media, and the king knew it was only a matter of hours before the headlines hit. The illusion of royal composure was over. Charles didn't sleep that night. He paced the floor of his private study until dawn, the sound of his shoes echoing off the marble like a ticking clock. His aides hovered nearby, afraid to speak. That folder, lay open on his desk, pages spread like wounds. Each line confirmed the truth. The heir to the throne was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do. But there was something the king could control, at least he thought so. The narrative. By 6 a.m., Charles had summoned his inner circle. Senior advisors, press secretaries, legal counsel, and the royal physician were all present. The king stood by the window, watching the fog roll across the mall. "We cannot allow this to become a spectacle," he said, voice low, trembling with exhaustion. "We will protect him, even if it costs everything." No one dared ask what everything meant. The strategy meeting was cold, mechanical. They discussed how to contain the damage. One advisor suggested blaming the leak on a rogue hospital employee. Another proposed releasing a partial statement, something dignified, vague, and safe. But the king's mind was already elsewhere. He wasn't thinking about PR. He was thinking about the throne. For the first time in centuries, a British monarch was facing the possibility of losing his heir before succession. It wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a constitutional crisis. That morning, Charles called for the Lord Chancellor and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Behind closed doors, they discussed the unthinkable, contingency plans in the event of William's passing. Would George become heir immediately? Would a regency be established if the boy was too young to assume certain roles? Every option carried emotional weight and political risk. When the Archbishop mentioned public mourning procedures, Charles cut him off. "Don't you dare speak of that yet," he snapped. "He's still alive." But his voice cracked at the end. Outside those walls, the story was already spreading. The headline hit like a bomb. Secret medical files revealed terminal diagnosis for Prince William. The palace erupted in chaos. Phones rang nonstop. The BBC requested comment. CNN offered live coverage. Reporters camped outside every royal residence. And yet, the king refused to speak. He issued a single sentence through the press office. "The family appreciates the public's concern and requests privacy as they navigate this difficult time." But privacy was a luxury no royal could afford now. Meanwhile, Kate had locked herself in her private suite with her mother. She read the article 3 times, trembling. It wasn't just the truth that broke her. It was the realization that it was out there for the world to dissect and distort. The medical details, the prognosis, the timeline, it was all printed in black and white. She tried calling William's doctor, but the line was dead. The palace had already shut down all external communication. The king had ordered it himself. "No more leaks," he said. "Not a word leaves this palace again." But it was too late. That afternoon, the king made what many later called the desperate move. He summoned his legal team and signed a document under royal seal, an emergency press embargo order. It forbade any British outlet from publishing further medical information about Prince William under penalty of prosecution. It was unprecedented. The British media complied, for now, but foreign outlets did not. Across the Atlantic, American and European networks went into overdrive. They speculated on the diagnosis, the family's reaction, and even the succession timeline. The king's attempt to silence the press had only fueled curiosity. Meanwhile, inside the palace, another storm was brewing. One far more personal. Kate confronted Charles for the first time since the leak. "You can't keep treating this like politics," she said, voice trembling. "He's not a headline. He's your son." Charles, exhausted, turned toward her. "And what would you have me do? Announce his death before it happens?" Tears welled in her eyes. "No, but tell the truth. Let people mourn with us instead of discovering it from journalists." He shook his head. "The truth destroys monarchies, Catherine. We must endure first, explain later. Her response was a whisper. You sound more like a king than a father. That cut deeper than she knew. Later that evening, the king walked alone through the palace chapel. He lit a candle for his son, a tradition his mother had taught him, and sat in silence. If you're listening, Mummy, he murmured, I could use your strength right now. The next morning, he summoned Dr. Reeves. Is there truly no hope? The doctor hesitated. Your Majesty, we've explored every possible avenue. He's stable for now, but it's only time. Charles finished for him. Yes, sir. The king looked out the window toward the gardens where William once played as a boy. Then we'll make that time count. What happened next would blur the line between royal duty and fatherly love. The king decided to bring forward a private ceremony, a family gathering meant for when a monarch abdicates or passes on. It was called the Oath of Continuity, a symbolic passing of responsibility from one heir to the next generation. Traditionally, it was done privately in the final days of a sovereign's reign. But this time, it would happen early for William. Only a handful of people were invited: Kate, the children, Princess, and 2 trusted advisors. The ceremony would take place at Windsor Chapel, away from cameras. William was too weak to stand, so they arranged for him to sit in an oak chair that had once belonged to King George VI. Kate helped him dress that morning. His hands trembled as she adjusted his cufflinks. Do you think it's too soon? He asked softly. She smiled through tears. No, it's right. They need to see their father as he truly is, a leader, even now. When they arrived at the chapel, the air was thick with unspoken grief. The king entered last, carrying a folded parchment, the oath itself. He placed it before William and said, My son, you were born to serve this nation. But service takes many forms. Today, you pass that duty onward, not because you must, but because you have earned it. William looked at his father for a long time. I never wanted the crown, he said quietly. I only wanted to make you proud. You have, Charles whispered. Then William turned to his son, George, who stood nervously beside him. This will be yours one day, he said, but never let it own you. Promise me that. George nodded, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the weight of the moment. When the ceremony ended, the family remained seated in silence. The king placed a hand on William's shoulder, but his eyes betrayed the pain of every father who's ever had to say goodbye too soon. That night, as the family returned to their quarters, Kate noticed something strange. One of the palace guards handed her a sealed envelope. This was delivered anonymously, Your Royal Highness, he said. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line written in typewriter ink. The king's document wasn't the only one signed that day. No name, no seal, just that haunting sentence. Kate's heart raced. What did it mean? What other document? When she confronted the king about it the next morning, he denied knowing anything. But his eyes, those weary, red-rimmed eyes, gave him away. Something else had been set in motion behind her back. Something legal, something final. And it would soon turn everything upside down. Because while the king had been trying to protect his son, he'd just signed a decision that could destroy the monarchy itself. It began not with fanfare, but with a vibration, Harry's phone, lighting up in the middle of a California night. He squinted at the screen, saw the name he hadn't seen in almost 2 years, and for a moment he thought he was dreaming. William. He stared at it until the call stopped, the name fading back into darkness. Then it rang again. Same name, same impossible reality. He hesitated, guilt, anger, confusion, all crashing at once, then finally swiped to answer. For a second, silence. All he could hear was the faint hum of distance between them. Then a voice, hoarse but unmistakable. Harry, it's me. Harry's heart lurched. The sound was softer than he remembered, weaker. Will? Is that really you? A breath. A fragile chuckle. Yeah, still me. For now. Those 2 words hit like a hammer. For now? Harry sat up, rubbing his face. They said it was bad. I didn't want to believe them. I didn't want you to, William replied. But it's true. What followed was a conversation that should have happened years earlier. Raw, clumsy, human. They stumbled over apologies neither knew how to say, fell into awkward pauses, tried to laugh about old times, then fell silent again. The weight between them wasn't just grief. It was years of resentment, misunderstandings, and the Atlantic Ocean itself. William finally broke the tension. You remember when Mum used to make us promise we'd look after each other? Harry swallowed hard. Yeah. Well, William said quietly. I need you to keep that promise now. Not for me, for them. The kids, Harry said. Them and Kate. She's stronger than she thinks. But when I'm gone, she's going to need someone who remembers what we were before all this mess.